Belevágok, jó? Dear friends, dear colleagues, dear fellow members, at home and abroad, this is the first workshop organized by the new hub of Academia Europaea, and it's organized under rather difficult circumstances. And it's organized under circumstances where certain areas of knowledge are particularly under big strain and also of much increased importance. And one of these is, of course, education, where probably all over the world, education suffered a lot over the last year. And so it is I think it's very proper to start our program of our hub with a workshop on education. Professor Play was graciously agreed to organize this meeting. And so let me welcome all of you, and let's hope that in not so too distant future, we can have meetings that are much more fun, but we need to start somehow. And I think this is a good way of starting with this meeting. So I would like to ask Professor Play to moderate today's meeting, and so let me give the floor to him.
Thank you, dear President Lovitz, for the possibility to initiate this first workshop in the name of our chapter of the Budapest Hub. I'm going to show some slides to illustrate what are our intentions, and then later I'm going to say a few words about the organization of these given workshops. Actually, the Budapest Hub of the Academia Europaea was initiated on the instigation of Professor Lovitz, former president of the Hungarian Academy. And within the Budapest Hub, there are several chapters. One chapter of which I am the co-chair. My name is Csaba Play. I'm a Hungarian linguist and psychologist, and the other chair is Esther Grellman, whom you will soon see. And on the initiative of the sort of foundation of this chapter, we try to outline some organizing principles that will direct our activity for the coming 4 years. First, we are all conscious that there is a need all over Europe to promote new methodologies of science education, both in order to facilitate the transfer of knowledge to the new generations and to increase sophistication in science. And of course, as a second issue that was highlighted with the recent pandemic situation, that we have to face new challenges of science, distance education. I don't want to suggest that this is only related to the pandemic, but certainly it raised social awareness and of these issues. And the third issue is how to promote gender and social equality in access to science education, STEM careers. Now, the hub is working in 4-year frameworks, so I'm going to say a few words only regarding our intended activities within that chapter of the hub for the recent year, for 2021. First, we are trying to launch a fact-finding mission. Of course, Academia Europaea, though it's supported pretty much by the administrative and intellectual help of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest, it's not a funding agency. It doesn't have many financial resources, so we don't want to initiate research as such, but first gain data on science education in different national educational settings and programs regarding ages, subjects taught, weekly hours, and so on. We already compiled a working questionnaire which we are sending through the different chapters and organizing sort of offices of the Academia Europaea, and we are especially interested, that's the point B, on innovative programs of science education, again, regarding methods, ages, and so on. And as a result of the analysis of these data gathering works, we will try to create possible contact networks for interested parties. Of course, we as a sort of intellectual organization, we cannot replace or undertake the task of the national forces organizing education as such, but we think that by disseminating knowledge, we can really help our colleagues. We are proposing different initial workshops. Originally in January, we were hoping that only the first workshop is going to be distance organized, but we are less optimistic now. The present event is part of our efforts to see what is the COVID pandemic effect on public image of science and science education. And then another one planned for October, maybe in real life. I don't like the word offline for the real life events. So hopefully in real life, but if not real life, then again, with distant access on sort of outlining what we see as the alternative science education routes in Europe. And as a continuation of this planned second workshop with 40 virtual or real participants is also to outline the plan of activity for the coming 3 years. Now, besides thanking you for your attention, let me have 2 more phrases about the organization of this workshop. We're going to hear 3 presentations, and the presentations on science education and mathematics education are going to be chaired by my colleague Esther Chalman, and the one on how we do research on human subjects in the difficult situations of the pandemic is going to be chaired by me. That's going to be, so inserted between the 2 science education talks, there's going to be one by a psychologist. All the 3 presenters are originally Hungarian nationals. Short Lovitz is working at the Kepler University in Linz, Austria. Julia Savos is working at the Central European University Baby Lab in Budapest. She's a psychologist. And Dana Szűcs is working as an educational neuroscientist in Cambridge, United Kingdom. We don't want to apologize for the fact that in their educational background and so on, all the 3 presenters are Hungarians. Of course, the COVID situation made it easier to make the available Hungarian research networks activated in this scene, but we think that the 3 Hungarian colleagues working in three different countries and 3 different labs show how Hungarian research networks can contribute to the activities of Academia Europaea and in general the European scientific scene. So I forward the word to Esther, who is going to chair the first speaker, and I am stopping my share here. Thank you for your attention. Oh, one more thing, excuse me. After each presentation, there's going to be a roughly 10-minute question-answer period. Please concentrate on specific issues raised by the presenter, because at the end of this meeting, we will have a 30 minutes time for general discussion on the overall issues of distance education and science education and so on. So Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Play. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce you our first speaker, who is Professor Lovitz. He's a professor in STEM education research methods at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz, from where he is working on numerous research projects worldwide related to technology integration into schools. Furthermore, he is the leader of the doctoral program in STEM education at JKU, and he works on teaching educational research methods worldwide and also coordinates research projects within the International Geogebra Institute. The title of his talk is Utilizing Technologies and to Nurture Creativities in STEAM Education. So I think that the floor or the Zoom is yours, Professor Lovitz. We are waiting really much your talk, please.
So thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation, Professor Play and Gershman, then also that Professor Lovitz introduced my talk. So I will try to time my presentation. And I think I shared the screen and it should be visible now, right? Okay, so thank you again. And for the introduction. So when I accepted this talk, I just would like to give a brief overview of some of the projects that we are doing on STEAM education. So currently I'm working in Johannes Kepler University in Linz, but collaborating in many universities and institutes around the world. So I will give you an overview of some of our work, what we are doing in Linz, and especially I introduce some of the work of my PhD students and colleagues in Johannes Kepler University. So in Linz, in JKU, we have 2 parts of the institute. It's one of the doctoral school on STEAM education research methods. So I'm leading this program. We have more than 40 PhD students and then many postdocs and colleagues working on the STEAM education program. And then when I went to Linz 3 years ago, I set up the program very similar to my experiences I had in Cambridge. So I was in Cambridge for 13 years running the educational research methods programs and working on many different kind of ways. So what we have in Linz is a similar program, and then we are trying to get visitors and colleagues working on different STEAM education projects. The other part of our work is Geogebra. So I'm working with Professor Markus Hohenbater, who is the inventor of Geogebra. Probably many of you know Geogebra. It's a open source mathematics software. So originally it was invented to connect dynamic geometry and computer algebra. And together with Markus, we have been developing a community around Geogebra, and now it's used in all different kind of subjects around the world. So currently there are more than 100 million users, teachers are using Geogebra in their work, and especially now we are getting millions of new users every month during the period, and I will outline what kind of development we are proposing for helping students around the world. So originally we thought that GeoGebra would be useful for secondary school, but now it's used essentially from kindergarten to university, and it's used in many different aspects of mathematics and other STEM subjects as well. And since this is an open source community, the community is sharing the resources. So there are now more than 2 million open educational resources available on the GeoGebra Materials platform, and it's growing by the tens of thousands every day. So it's freely available for all schools. And especially in Hungary, there is an organized way to reach GeoGebra materials for teachers and students. And also we are developing a community on GeoGebra. So we have more than 200 GeoGebra institutes in 110 countries, and then try to assist in this community with the technology work related to mathematics and STEM teaching. So I would like to give you an overview of what kind of research we are doing. So I'm mostly focusing on the research related to technology and STEAM education, and we try to work mostly on creativities and innovations. And I will give you some insight about the technological innovation, the pedagogical innovation, and some of the policy research what we are conducting. So what we are focusing on is that how we can enhance creativity into education. So creativity or creativities can be defined in many different ways. So we work with colleagues all over the world, especially with my colleague in Cambridge, Pam Bernard, who is a professor in creativities. We try to look at that how creativities could be introduced in the classroom, how we can detect these creativities, and then also how we could encourage these creativities to introduce in the classroom. So what we try to focus on is creating technologies, pedagogies, and policies, and then create this environment to be able to introduce this creativity into the classroom in many different ways. So first, I would like to give you some of the technological development we are working on. So when we designed GeoGebra originally, we designed it for desktops, but now, especially with the COVID situation, most of the use of technology is on tablets and in phones. And then also we try to see that how we can design online environments to support teaching with GeoGebra. So it's available now in many different forms. And then also what we try to do, we try to rethink that whole electronic textbooks could be introduced into education. So we created the GeoGebra book. So, and then that allows teachers and students to create their own textbooks. So in that case, then they can collect all the materials and then supporting these materials. And there is the community is already developing tens of thousands different kind of textbooks and activities, which could be organized to a specific teacher and students as well. And also we created, especially 1 year ago for the COVID situation, that creating an environment for collaboration, and collaboration not only in the classroom, but also online. So we created the GeoGebra classroom. So in that case, teachers can create their own classroom online, and then the students can work together, and then also the teachers can have an overview with this. So this is a kind of virtual learning environment, which is very simple to set up. And it's used by teachers and then also students to create their own groups to be able to work online together. The other thing, what we try to do is not only work with materials which is found online, but we are creating a sensor app which is enables students to collect data from their own devices and then use it for mathematics and physics and other STEM subject teaching as well. Also, we created an exam app, so it will help teachers to do some assessment with students through the Geogebra platform. But what we try to do most is the two focuses, how we can connect physical and digital environments. So we are focusing now on resources on augmented reality, and I will give you some insight that how we can use augmented reality in the different pedagogical ways. So for example, this is a Geogebra augmented reality app that students can walk around in their own environment at home, and they can do modeling of their surroundings. So they could explore their homes or outside. And I will give you lots of examples that how we can use augmented reality for teaching different subjects. And of course, we can have mathematical objects placed in the environments of students, so they can walk around and then explore it, and then directly manipulate these AR objects in their own homes or around the world. So I will talk more about these environments. And we try to connect this to the physical world. So we are working a lot with 3D printing. So from Budapest, we work a lot with Craftbot. We try to create an educational printer, and then we try to see that how we can use 3D printing, connecting physical and digital worlds with for mathematics and STEM teaching around the world. And then, of course, it's easy to connect with arts. So many of our work is connected to the arts. So we are working with hundreds of artists, and we are organizing conferences on mathematics and the STEAM arts. I will get back to this point later as well. And for the technological development, we try to look at machine learning, that how we could use the users' experiences of students, how we can create online environments which is helping their learning trajectories. And we also try to see that how we can detect creativities when something happens in the classroom, and then how we could notify teachers from these activities in which our students are doing. And then also we are doing lots of methodological work. So we work on usability research to connect UX research and education research. We created a new tool which is called Geogebra Nodes, which is an online portfolio environment. And then we try to connect the different fields of mathematics and sciences into a map, which is helping teachers and students to find the resources which is connected to them. So see, these are some of the development which we connect strongly to technology. But pedagogy is one of it's very important when we are using technology. So several of my colleagues, Edith Lindenbauer, for example, is looking at misconceptions, that how the misconceptions in digital environments are different than the misconceptions than students are experiencing in paper pencil environments. We also try to look at gamification, that how we can introduce gamification into the classroom, and then how we can create this environment for children. So gamification is all around us. If we buy something online or interact with many things in our life. So what we try to do is we try to create a gamified editor that each students and teachers can create their own games, and then we try to do this gamified environment for personalized for students and teachers. So my colleague Saleh in Turkey, we are running a project on gamification on education. But not only gamification is important, that when we can do different approaches in the classroom, both digital and physical classroom. So we look at flipped classroom and inquiry-based classroom methodologies to connect technologies in these environments. And moreover, in this kind of physical and digital connection, we try to see that whole culture and students' surroundings are can be interrelated in these activities. So my PhD student Shireen from Egypt is looking at how we can use Egyptian architecture and then connecting it with GeoGebra, with augmented reality, 3D printing, 3D scanning, to introduce the cultural and also artistic and the or how we can connect these environments in the classroom. So we are running lots of experiments in Egypt and in other countries as well. Or Ben, my other student from Luxembourg, is looking at how we can use modeling of outdoor activities. So we work a lot with Met City Maps, which is creating outdoor trails. So students going around their cities or their schools, and then they are modeling the different aspects of their environments, and then use augmented reality and 3D printing. We do these kind of projects with Korean architecture in Korea. And then also my colleague in Israel is looking at how the cultural aspect of mathematics teaching could be introduced in the classroom from architecture and many other artistic activities as well. So the other direction, what we try to integrate is games. So we started to develop games, but we realized that students are very happy developing games, both in the classroom and also in this digital environment. So we are running lots of game application or game design workshops with students on GeoGebra, 3D printing, augmented reality. So we are trying to model games which is already available for students, and then rethinking that how we can use this kind of games in the classroom. And then also we are trying to connect these games for their learning. So what we try to do is create a new era of manipulatives, which could be physical and digital as well. So for an example, the students are taking their own photos, and then we can rotate it in GeoGebra, we can print it, and then they can use it as an art object, or they can measure their heads, for example. Or we are running a big competition on dividing a cube into equal parts, and then we print these problems, and students are sending in thousands of different solutions with regard to this activity. And then, of course, we are trying to look at tiling, 2D and 3D tiling, and we work with games. So probably some of you know the Logifaces game, and then we are running a project on how to introduce 3D modeling and gaming into schools. So I have another team of students who are focusing on creations. So we have lots of these 3D printing activities in the classroom. So this is some of the results of our cube competitions. And we try to develop these new games. So this is a Voronoi game, which is developed by a group of students. And then we can move from 2D to 3D. And we try to look at that how we can include, for example, cooking. So we started to design cookie cutters, and then we make these cookies and then eat mathematics together with students. So we run these workshops in the Ars Electronica Festival in Linz, and then in many different places. And then my colleague is here from Finland, Kristóf Fenyvesi, and we are doing many of these activities through the experience workshop. And the other thing, what we try to do is looking at how 3D printing could be introduced in schools. So we created a 3D printing from wood, and then we introduce the mechanisms of 3D printing and then bringing it to the schools. And then also we try to look at microgames. So Imam, my student in Indonesia, students have a smartphone. So we try to develop small games then that could be used as an inspiring activity for students to use mathematics and sciences. So some more activities I would like to highlight, and then I think I will be running out of time. So we look at origami, how origami could be connected to mathematics, modeling, coding, augmented reality, and so on. And then in this case, we can connect girls with the classroom. And then we also try to look at different medias that the students are working on. So my student from Iceland is looking at silent videos that students are recording these short video clips and then give it to each other, and they becoming YouTubers. And then this could give very deep mathematical activities in their work. Also, my other student, Giulia from Torino, looking at mathematical memes. And in Italy, there are thousands of students are involved in developing mathematical memes. And they are developing these memes with, and then the teachers are trained to use these memes to develop deep mathematical context. And then it's spiraling out of the classroom. So there is a whole movement on mathematical memes in the classroom as well. Lajos, my other student, is looking at how to connect mathematics and music. So he's developing an app for teaching mathematics through music. My other student, Martin, is looking at sustainable development. We use the donut economy, and then we introduce statistical models and then modeling of sustainability of different countries. Yuka, maybe he's also in the audience, and some of you know, he's looking at students' well-being and then whole movements of students could be contributing to students' work in the classroom as well. And also we work with a huge organization in South America called Geogebra. So there is a big competition, students walking around and then taking pictures and then use these pictures in their classrooms. So maybe if I could have 2 or 3 more minutes, then I'd probably skip policy, because we try to look at that how this could be integrated into the curriculum. We develop STEAM education curriculum. I think then that could be a part of another lecture. And we are running lots of different projects. So now we are working on 9 different Erasmus Plus projects, all connected to STEAM education, and then looking at different aspects of STEAM education. We very closely work with Professor Fenyvesi on the experience workshop movement, both in Hungary and in Finland. So we are organizing together many activities and then running projects. And these are some of the activities. So we just organized the Bridges conference, which is mathematics and arts. And then, of course, it was a very successful conference in Page in 2010. And then we organized it in Linz. But also what we try to do is supporting young researchers in STEAM education. So last week we organized an early career researcher conference for STEAM educators. We organized the mathematics education in the digital age conference. Next year we host the European Society for Math Education summer school. And then also, if you are interested about these topics, next May, and in this May, we will organize Designing Innovation, a STEAM education conference in Linz, but we are involved in many different kind of activities. And if you are interested, I can share, we have more than 100 papers for all of these topics published, so I can forward this. And we have a big community with more than 13,000 members who are sharing their ideas on mathematics, GeoGebra, and STEAM activities on Facebook. So you are very welcome to join. And then we are very happy to collaborate. We always have lots of visitors, both students and academics. So we are very happy to work with you. We also work with the Ars Electronica Center and the Arts University in Linz. So we try to make these connections with many places around the world. So I hope it was not too dense. So these are some of the activities, but probably you just have a glance of what we are trying to do. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Lovitz, for your nice and very spectacular talk. Now I'm asking our audience whether some of you has some remarks or questions. As Professor Play said at the beginning of this event, you are kindly asked to put your questions into the chat window, and we will try to read them. I think that you were the first speaker of this event, and maybe our audience is a bit shy, but at the end of this event, everybody has the opportunity to put your question also to you. So I think that now we can switch to our second speaker, who will be introduced to you by Professor Play.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is approaching a different issue. Professor Lovitz showed us how technological tools can promote innovations in teaching physics and mathematics and so on. But in the new situations created by the lockdown, people working as scientists on humans also have to face difficult challenges, namely that they have to continue their research, because otherwise our students cannot make their PhDs. We don't publish papers and everything. But at the same time, we have to observe the avoiding human contact situations. Julia Savos, who is going to be the next speaker, is working towards the solution of these challenges in very specific situations. The reason I wanted her to talk is because she's going to show that even in very intricate situations, modern cognitive and behavioral research methods can be applied or accommodated to the no real human contact situation. Julia is a psychologist working at the Baby Laboratory Child Development Center of Central European University Budapest, and she's going to show us that how their lab is implementing new tools to investigate, to do distance investigation of infant behavior. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Csaba. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, hello. I'm Julia Savos. I'm a research assistant at the CEU Baby Lab, and I would like to talk about lab-based and online infant and children studies. So at CEU, we have a baby lab. We have 6 different labs and a beautiful reception room. And we have different experiments or studies. We want to investigate how problem-solving skills appears, how first and second, we have different questions about first and second language acquisitions, categorization. So we are interested in how babies and kids understand the word. Last year, I took a picture of our reception room. Yeah, it's nice and cozy. It's full of toys. And in February, I took another picture, but we had to introduce 3 new items. And these items are less friendly. And after a while, we decided that somehow these items were not enough. So these were not totally safe. And then we decided to close our baby lab. And since November, my workplace looks like this. So this is the prototype of a home office station. There are some similarities, but the biggest difference is that there are no kids and no babies. So if there are no kids, we cannot continue our studies, we cannot finish them, we cannot publish. So we just needed a backup plan. And our plan was to create an online platform where we were able to do the same kind of studies and research, but in a safe way. First, I would like to talk about some lab-based studies in order to understand the differences and similarities of lab-based and online studies. We like lab-based studies because we can have a control over all the circumstances about, we can control many factors. And we thought that we might not be able to control these factors on an online platform. So we, in the baby lab, we had many behavioral studies. This is like a game for the kids. We create a situation where they have to do something. So we just play with them, and we are interested in their behavioral reactions. Or if they can talk, we can just talk to the kids, to the older ones. Here you have an example. This is a lab-based study. The child plays with a toy, then he has to collect some balls. So it was a fun and easy task. So we tried to implement all these things and to create an online platform. And the situation was very similar. Here you can see a picture of our platform. And on the right corner, you can see the experimenter and the child. There's an online platform where we uploaded different videos, different stimuli or materials. And we showed a short video to the child. Then after we asked different questions. And in this way, we somehow got an insight on how the child understood the situation. So it's a short video about 2 characters, they collect resources. And it's very similar to the lab-based situation because they just they just had some insights or new experience about a game or a video. So this was an easy way to implement the behavioral studies. But at the lab, we have many eye tracking studies. An eye tracker is a device which can which recognize the human eyes, and an eye tracker gives us many data about where the human looks at for how long. So it's a very efficient way of tracking a child or infant looking paths and directions. I will show you a short video. Oops. Yeah, so the sound is not important. Now you can see the blue lines. These blue lines are the infant's looking paths, while the dot, the circle, the blue circle is the baby's focus. When the dot is bigger, it means that the child or the infant was looking longer to that specific location. Yes, so as you can see, it's efficient. We can have like an output file where it can be, where the data can be visualized. And for looking time studies, we use this kind of devices. A looking time study means, or well, actually, we use looking time studies for those kids or for infants, because they cannot tell what they think, but they can show us by tracking their looking paths. So there's an observation that infants prefer to look longer to a novel or new object, situation, or stimuli compared to a familiar object or stimuli. I will show you an example. So here you can see an apple. Your looking time will be, let's say, somewhere around 2 or 3 seconds. And this is part of habituation phase, because on my next slide, you will see the same apple, but I suppose that your looking time will be less than 2 or 3 seconds, because you're somehow already familiar with this object or fruit. And if on my next slide you will see the same apple, you will get bored, because you are already familiar with this object. So this can be seen as a rule-following event compared to a rule-violating event. So if I show you something new, a novel object or event, you will be surprised. So you will look longer to these grapes than to the previous apple. And your looking time will be longer. Here you can see how a looking time study looks in the lab. So there's the dark room, the baby is watching the video, the mother is passive, and now, as you can see, the baby looked away. So basically her looking time period ended. And for this purposes, an eye tracker device can be very helpful. And to implement this study was quite a challenge, because at home parents do not have an eye tracker. So this is why we started using some extra or background softwares. On the left corner, you can see the control panel, where the experimenter had to say to the software when the baby is looking at the screen and when the baby is looking away. you can see the baby, and on the left side of the screen, you can see the video. I suggest you to check the baby's eyes in order to see when he is looking away. Yeah, so this was, oops, the video just started again. Yes, so the baby looked away. He got bored of this event, and in this case, the background software will tell us when we have to jump to the next trial, to the rule violating events. And there are different kind of, not only looking time studies, we have preferential looking studies. In this case, we are not interested on the baby's looking time, but we want to see where exactly the baby is looking at the monitor, whether she's looking on the right or left side, to the corner. So we want to see, or we want to know exactly where the baby is looking at. And for this purpose, this is how we did a preferential looking study at home. You can see the baby on the right side of the screen, and on the left side you can see two very similar events. The upper video is the experimenter's control window, and the bottom one is what the baby sees. And I suggest you to watch the baby's face, oops, and eyes, and maybe you just seen that, oops. It's hard to control these videos. Yeah, and now I stopped the video because now, for example, we can see that the baby is looking on the right side of the screen. Actually, these videos are mirrored, so she's looking on the left side. But without having an eye tracker, we can see and we can track, if everything goes well, where the baby is looking. And to be more precise, we use a calibration video. This is a calibration video where we want to see how the baby's eyes are positioned when they are looking at the edges or the corner of the screen. This video is still mirrored, so she's looking on the right side when the star was on the left side. Yes. Of course, the hardest part is that we do not have at home an eye tracker, so we have to analyze these data frame by frame. And now I will jump into limitations, because this is our biggest problem, that for a looking time study, we need many extra or background softwares. These are complicated procedures, and we need powerful computers. The data analysis takes very much takes time, because analyzing a video frame by frame, it takes, well, it's time consuming. Sometimes we need more than an hour to analyze a 5-minute data. And there are many uncontrollable factors compared to the lab-based studies, where we have some control over these factors. These factors are the background noises, or sometimes the whole family is looking or is watching the video, which is not quite the best way of doing infant studies. And our biggest enemy is the internet connection. So when it's slow or there's poor connection, there's a big delay on the experimenter side and what the baby actually see on her own side, and we will not be able to synchronize these two screens. Now I would like to say a few things about possibilities, because there are there are good things. Basically, anyone who wants to participate can, from anywhere and almost any time, because we are flexible. This is not location-based, so there are no limitations like this. And a good thing is that we can still collect data regardless of the constraints, because now in Budapest almost everything is closed, so there are no events, and the kindergarten, there's no kindergarten at the moment. And this is why it's easy to recruit. Almost everyone wants to participate, because an online event is still better than nothing. And we do not need a warm-up stage, so we can skip this part, because at home everyone feels comfortable, and it goes pretty good. And it's virus safe, so we do not have to clean everything before and after the data collection. And we can be flexible. So if the parents are asking us for a new appointment because the baby is not in the best mood, we can just be flexible, because this doesn't mean that they have to travel again to the lab. So we just have to send them a new link. This is all. And the best part is that we already replicated 2 methods. So it seems that it doesn't really matter where the babies are, so they can be in the lab or at home. The data will be very, very similar. And this is good. Thank you. And I will stop my screen sharing.
Well, thank you for the presentation, Julia. And we have time for a few questions, either through your microphone or through the comment section down in your chat section. While you're thinking, let me ask you one simple question. You said that it's easier to recruit and so on. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us that since you started that sort of distance experimenting, how many subjects did you run? I'm just curious, roughly.
Well, I tested more than 100 babies, but we have many studies online studies at the moment. I think we have 11 or 12 online studies. So there are PhD students and other assistants who are testing, and we tested more than, I have a database, but I think we tested more than 500 kids.
Okay, no, that's important to know. So it's not just a curious trying online experiments with 3-4 children. I mean, I just wanted to make the audience aware that this is already a massive experimentation in this regard. Yeah. But go ahead with your questions. I don't want to.
Well, we already finished a few questions, not just, yeah, thank you, Petra. Here you have the exact number.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we already finished a few studies, not just, we just started them. Oh, sorry. This is this was a private message. Yeah. So we tested more than 700 kids.
Yeah. Yes. Questions, comments? I have a comment, but again, I don't want to monopolize the situation. Basically, regarding the limitation, it's many of the studies done at the CEU Baby Lab are working on issues of the social mind, where with the infants, you always manipulate the interaction situation, that some real human agents are participating and so on. And what do you think? Would there be possible to use any distance situations where human interaction is involved in the studies?
Well, yes. Now I remember that last year there were some ideas to use this kind of lab-based equipment like an eye tracker during an online study. So not exactly online. So to send these equipments to the parents and to ask them to use it. Of course, these were just a few ideas, but somehow this could work. I think it's manageable. Unfortunately, these equipments are quite expensive, so we cannot translate or send them, but as an alternative, it could be an alternative.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your presentation. And I hope we will have more questions and comments to you in the general discussion session. I give the floor to Esther again. And the third speaker is going to be Dinesh Suj. She's going to introduce him.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, our third speaker will be Professor Dinesh Suj. He works currently at the Department of Psychology, Center for Neuroscience in Education at the University of Cambridge. In his talk entitled Math Anxiety, he will point out that many students have a deliberating emotional reaction to mathematics, termed mathematics anxiety. Hopefully, I personally believe that after your talk, we will feel a bit more relieved. So I transfer the floor to Professor Suj, please. We are looking forward to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Right? Yeah, thank you. I will share my screen. I hope everybody will be anxious about math anxiety after this. So that's the topic of the talk, and this is based on our booklet on math anxiety. You see a photo of this on the left. This has been published by the UNESCO IB, and you can get a copy of this free of charge with the internet link below. So it's available in Hungarian as well, thanks to a Hungarian colleague who translated this. It's written for teachers, so it's a very non-technical summary of math anxiety. And then what is, let me see if I put this into full screen. What is math anxiety? So usually math anxiety is defined as a feeling of tension and anxiety that interferes with the manipulation of numbers and the solving of mathematical problems in ordinary life and in academic situations as well. You could briefly say that math anxiety is fear of learning and doing mathematics. It ranges from mild tension to experiencing strong fear of mathematics, can be experienced in school settings and in everyday life. You can see it when some people have to count money in the shop. They may be fairly anxious about this. I remember a baker demonstrating this phenomenon every day, anytime I had to pay to her, which was fairly consistent demonstration of math anxiety in my view. And very importantly, people who are relatively good in mathematics can also have math anxiety. It is not restricted to poor achievers. We have shown this in our own research. It's a very wide-ranging phenomenon. I'm from a small village from Szabolcs-Szatmár, from Nyírtelek, where I definitely have observed math anxiety many times in case of many students, but I also observed math anxiety a lot at Cambridge University, at a very well-selected group of students as well. So you can find math anxiety everywhere, in my opinion. Why should we care about math anxiety? We should care about it because it has negative consequences on the short term, medium term, and the long term as well. On the short term, math anxiety can lead to worries that can occupy students' thoughts during test situations, and this can negatively affect their math scores. So they are focused on their worries and not on the test solutions. On the medium term, students with high math anxiety may avoid elective math classes, even if they are good in mathematics. So the math achievement level of these students may not reach their full potential on the long term. And on the very long term, then students and adults with high levels of math anxiety may avoid math-related careers altogether. And it is especially important from this point of view that females tend to have a higher level of math anxiety than males. So math anxiety may perhaps contribute to the relative lack of women in math-heavy careers. And finally, math-anxious adults may experience lesser quality of life. For example, they may fail to properly reflect on their finances or on their mortgage payment. So there may be lots of negative consequences of math anxiety. And then how do we know if somebody has high math anxiety? Math anxiety is usually measured by questionnaires. When filling these questionnaires, people respond simple questions. They respond to how anxious they feel when learning or doing mathematics. And students and adults achieving a high score on math anxiety questionnaires are considered to have high math anxiety. For example, a reasonable definition would be to define the top 10% of most anxious students to have high math anxiety. You could imagine other ways of measuring math anxiety besides questionnaires. This is not a very trivial issue we can discuss if you like. So for example, on the right side of this slide, you see a questionnaire example. That's our own questionnaire, which we published in this paper indicated below. This questionnaire can be used free of charge without permission. It's important to establish that math anxiety is a distinct form of anxiety. In particular, we have to distinguish it especially from test anxiety and general anxiety. Test anxiety is anxiety for all kinds of test situations, not only in regard to mathematics. And general anxiety refers to an individual's tendency to feel anxious about everyday situations. For example, people with high general anxiety may be worried about their health or on their family or about making simple decisions in their everyday life. We know that individuals with high general anxiety and high test anxiety also tend to have high math anxiety. However, also in our own research, we have established, and other researchers also have established, that these three anxiety forms here are separable from each other. And therefore, math anxiety is considered a distinct form of academic anxieties. As I mentioned, math anxiety, one problem with math anxiety is that it can negatively affect mathematics scores. This is particularly obvious if we consider a large group of people. For example, in a large sample of people, the typical finding is that the stronger is math anxiety, the weaker is math performance. For example, in countries with high math anxiety, students tend to have lower math performance than in countries with lower math anxiety. Here you can see this demonstrated by OECD data. The math scores are on the vertical axis, and the math anxiety scores in standardized form are on the horizontal axis. You can see there is a good range of scores, but you can observe a very clear tendency, relationship between math score and math anxiety. Of course, this doesn't necessarily say anything about causality here, which is another important question. And you see that for the same level of math performance, there is a good range of math anxiety scores. For example, Sweden, Hungary, and Italy are very different on math anxiety scores, whereas the math performance is about the same. And as I mentioned, so on, this above observation is very related to one more observation, according to which very poor math achievers have about double the chance to have high math anxiety than other students. And we can think about why this may be. One possibility is that high math anxiety may lead to worries about math that disrupt performance on math tests, or perhaps poor math achievement can lead to high math anxiety if students worry about their weak performance. This is an interesting chicken or the egg question. We have written a paper about this if you would like to know more about this question. And that said, we also know that about 80% of students with high math anxiety actually do not perform very poorly in math. This is a fairly important observation in my view. And this relates to an important discussion point, that is that emotional and cognitive mathematics difficulties seem to be very separable from each other, seem to be very distinct. First of all, it is a very frequent misconception that only very poor math achievers show high levels of math anxiety. I have seen this especially a lot from decision makers who assume that only stupid pupils have math anxiety. This is untrue, as I just mentioned. Also, according to our research, about 80% of children with high math anxiety are actually normal to high math achievers. So these children are able to do mathematics at a normal level or above average levels even. However, on the long term, they may be kept away from math-related career choices by their high math anxiety. We can imagine a plausible course of events where high math anxiety leads to less affinity to take elective math classes or to follow school specializations requiring more mathematics. And the classmates at the same time taking elective math classes will of course become better in mathematics. So the students who avoided math training, optional math training, will perceive that they have poorer ability in mathematics compared to others who took elective math classes. This will justify the higher levels of math anxiety, leading to even more avoidance of learning mathematics. So this is a plausible causal mechanism. There's a lot of research targeting these potential mechanisms here. In summary, we could say that there is a possibility that high math anxiety can lead to the avoidance of elective math training opportunities, ultimately leading to the avoidance of math-related career choices. Here is some data related to this question. This is coming from our large-scale investigation in the United Kingdom. On the vertical axis, you can see math scores. On the horizontal axis, you can see math anxiety scores. The average of the math scores is 100. The standard deviation is 15 on this scale. So anybody achieving beyond 115 on the math test is quite good. Anybody achieving under 85 is rather bad in terms of math performance. You can also see the vertical line at math anxiety score 30. This is the threshold of high math anxiety. So above this line, on the right of this line, are the top 10% most math anxious children. And one thing to notice is that on the right of this math anxiety threshold, you see quite a few children who are relatively good achievers. So they are average achievers, they are in the average range of the math scale, or they may even be very good achievers beyond one standard deviation above the mean. And one correlate, actually the best visible correlate of math anxiety seems to be that we are losing children from the very high achievement range. Right, so you see that in the right top corner in this green triangle, there are not too many observations. As math anxiety scores are increasing, the very well-performing children are, so to say, disappearing. And you don't see this regularity at the bottom. If math anxiety would be strongly correlated with poor achievement, you could expect most of the math anxious children to be clustering at the bottom right of this image. However, when we look at the worst achievers who achieve under 85 on the math scale, we see that most of these children, 80% of them, are on the left of the math anxiety threshold. They are actually not very math anxious. So 20% of the poor achievers are highly math anxious. So we can observe an interesting dissociation. About 80% of children with high math anxiety are normal to high achievers. In contrast, about 80% of children with poor math achievement do not actually have high math anxiety. What can be the reason of this discrepancy, of this dissociation? A suggestion, fairly plausible one, is that high math anxiety would mostly appear in children who find mathematics important, but at the same time also have relatively low confidence in mathematics. That is, some children performing well in math may develop high mathematics anxiety because they value math highly, but they also have low confidence in math. In contrast, some children who perform poorly in math may not develop high math anxiety because they may not be interested in the subject, they may not value mathematics, or they may not recognize the significance of their poor math performance for their future. That is potential theory behind this dissociation we can observe. In summary, it seems fairly clear that emotional and cognitive math difficulties are distinct, so they likely need different remedies as well. Another important point to consider about math anxiety is that girls often show much higher levels of mathematics anxiety than boys, even if they are as good in mathematics or even better in many countries than boys. This is so even in highly gender equal countries. There is some data suggesting that it is even more so in gender equal countries, interestingly. So here you can see some supporting data on the left. That graph is coming from our own study. From the UK, data from 10-year-olds, you can see that reading and math scores are very similar in girls and boys, whereas math anxiety scores are very different, and also general anxiety and test anxiety scores are very different, girls showing much higher levels of anxiety than boys. You can compare this data with historical data on the right from Hembry, from meta-analysis from 1990. This included data from the 70s and 80s. And you can see that this old analysis also found that females show much higher level of math anxiety than males. At that time, there was very little data available in younger age groups. Our own studies have this quite a bit. The interesting bit here is that this discrepancy between male and female math anxiety hasn't changed at all during the past 30 years, when gender equality was increasing, supposedly. So what can be the reason of this discrepancy in self-reported math anxiety scores between girls and boys? There can be several reasons we observe this phenomenon. First of all, there often exist gender stereotypes about boys being better in math and science than girls, and many parents, teachers, and students may share these stereotypes, even math teachers, I would say. When children can learn these stereotypes, they can learn them in their family very early in life, even before entering school. So they may already enter school with very strong preconceptions about what they should be good or bad in. A related observation is that girls often report lower self-confidence in mathematics than boys, even if they perform equally well. We always observe this in our own studies, gender difference. There was no gender difference in math performance, but there was always a substantial gap in anxiety and confidence. It is possible that negative stereotypes about girls and mathematics can lead to high math anxiety and low confidence in mathematics in case of girls. Another possibility is that girls may be genuinely more anxious than boys. For example, in our own studies, we have observed all the time that girls also have higher general anxiety and test anxiety than boys, even in primary school, even in 9-year-olds. In Italy and the UK, we have already measured higher anxiety levels in girls than in boys. Very interesting, actually, if you think about this, that you can already measure this in 9-year-olds. And it is possible that the overall higher anxiety levels in girls may predispose them to have higher levels of math anxiety as well. Other reasons may be that girls are perhaps more willing to admit their anxiety in many cultures than boys, as boys are often taught to be tough and not to admit their anxieties, or girls may be just better able to recognize their anxiety than boys of the same age, as usually they may be more emotionally mature than boys of the same age. So there may be several reasons behind this gender gap we can observe in math anxiety and anxiety. I would say that whatever is the cause of the gender gap in math anxiety, higher self-perceived math anxiety in girls may lead to lesser confidence and avoidance of optional math learning, so irrespective of the exact cause. So we could reach the conclusion that higher math anxiety in girls than in boys may be a serious factor behind the male dominance of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, which can be observed fairly universally. Another important question to discuss is whether there are any special triggers of math anxiety in school. Very interesting for educators, I'm pretty sure. We have done a large interview study about this question, where we found that students with low and high math anxiety had very similar school experiences. However, they interpreted their school experiences very differently. And there were two important factors which determined the interpretation of their experiences were confidence in mathematics, we have heard about this before, and resilience and persistence, I would say the ability to exert sustained effort towards achieving a goal, as we can define it as such now. Regarding confidence, we found that many primary school students with high math anxiety thought that the work required in math class was beyond their capabilities, their ability level, that's the key word here. And then some students reported loss of confidence when they encountered more challenging work than before. Perhaps paradoxically, this could happen. In the UK, there are achievement groups typically, and this could happen when the students were moved into higher achievement groups, exactly because the teachers thought that they were good in mathematics. So in that case, the teachers thought that the students were up to more demanding work. However, the confidence level of the students was not yet up to these expectations. We also observed in the UK that in secondary school, many students suddenly felt that there was now much more at stake than in primary school regarding their math performance, and this was accompanied by a drop in confidence levels. The importance of resilience and persistence is well illustrated by this quote from a 9-year-old girl who said that sometimes my mind gets a bit confused. I felt really frustrated, but after 2 days, everything went into my head and I knew everything. So this little girl, 9-year-old girl, was able to struggle for 2 days to try to understand the material, and then she ultimately succeeded thanks to her resilience. Another important factor behind triggering math anxiety in our study was confusion experienced by the children. That is, children could get confused when they encounter different teaching methods and solution strategies without perhaps deeper understanding of these. That is, different teachers and parents promoted different solution methods at times, and children could not understand how these solution methods related to each other, how they were similar, how they were dissimilar, which one to use in which exact situation. This led to confusion and triggered math anxiety. Another important factor is, this is not from our studies, but we know about this, is teacher subject knowledge. It is frequently observed in studies that the highest levels of math anxiety are actually measured in trainee primary school math teachers, perhaps because they also do not understand math as much as they would want to understand it, and they may kind of confuse perhaps their students in school, or transmit their anxiety to them in school. That's an additionally important factor, which we haven't researched ourselves, but I know about this from the literature. And then I try to roll up quickly. Another big question, very important one, of course, is how to alleviate math anxiety. There is not yet a best solution, so it's not clear what works best. We can just give some tentative suggestions. It is very likely that we have to tailor these solutions to particular groups. For example, in the group of poorly performing students with high math anxiety, it may be important to very gradually increase exercise difficulty in order to build both math skills and confidence step by step, to reward genuine effort and thinking, not only achieving a correct solution. And students probably should understand that it is natural and inevitable to make errors, and they can even learn from these. And students, importantly, should understand the difference between doing mathematics and doing it quickly. They are not the same. Some students may enjoy doing mathematics at their own pace. Perhaps they even enjoy it quite a bit, but they may hate the time pressure of a test situation. In this case, the time pressure of the test situation may trigger math anxiety rather than mathematics per se. In case of students who are well performing but have relatively low confidence in mathematics, it may be important that they understand the negative impact of anxiety on their performance, and that they can separate their relatively good performance and worries about mathematics from worries about mathematics. And it's important to put the students' relatively good performance into perspective, as they may seriously underestimate their ability for doing mathematics, especially when they compare themselves to the best of their class. So it's important to build confidence at the right performance level. We have seen that in well-performing students, math anxiety can be triggered when expectations towards them are increased. It may be useful to discuss worries about mathematics explicitly in class. And in case of very anxious students, it may be advisable to use coaching or counseling about anxiety management. Finally, in case of girls with high math anxiety, it is important to understand the math-related gender stereotypes of students, teachers, and parents alike, and how they can affect performance. It is important not to attribute success or failure on a math task to gender, and to promote STEM subjects to girls and boys equally at all levels of schooling. And older students can already understand their own gender stereotypes, supposedly, which they may have brought with themselves from their family. So it may be worth having a chat about these with them. So sorry for the overshoot. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Here are some sources if you want to know more about this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your nice and interesting talk. And now I'm asking our participants whether there are some questions or remarks connected to this talk. Please, Professor Hunyadi.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have a comment and a question. My comment is that this was a very interesting presentation, but I felt a little bit that it fell short of giving explanations, and it stayed a little bit on the level of phenomenology. For instance, you asked this issue of valuing math as an important aspect for math anxiety, but we didn't present actually study thus, which would support or rule out this option. And I think it would be interesting actually to study this question as a possible explanation. This is one thing. The other thing is that during my life, somehow in elementary and high school, I was always attending mathematics special classes. And I'm not a mathematician eventually, but somehow I did. And throughout my elementary and high school career,
I did not feel that I felt too much of this math anxiety. And what I think would probably the reason is that when we were studying mathematics, we were studying always through the examples. And we had to keep solving solutions. And step by step, we become better. On the other hand, we had a physics teacher who was asking us to memorize definitions. And I guess this could have been done for mathematics too. And that creates a lot of anxiety. So my question is that, isn't it better from the point of view of math anxiety to keep the students learning through examples and solving problems rather than memorizing definitions and actually things? So isn't it this is an important contributor to the development or non-development of math anxiety? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the comments. Regarding the value of math, there is a lot of research on that. So I haven't included those because of time constraints. So there is research suggesting, that's not my own theory, which I mentioned there. So that is from a research paper I know of, whom the author suggested that math anxiety may especially be triggered in these students who value math highly but have low confidence. We also know that math self-efficacy and math confidence is strongly related to math anxiety. There is a lot of data on this. So it's a great question. It asks about something important. And I would agree with your second point. Learning through example probably makes you understand the material better. And this is what I meant when I was talking about confusion. And in the UK, it's often not very typical to ask students to understand material very thoroughly, perhaps. I could risk this statement. I had my math education in Hungary, which is still actually helping me after so many years, still. And we found that confusion about not understanding, for example, which solution method to use, whereas they result in the equivalent solution. You know, they are just different pathways, and students often don't understand the difference between these and why to use one of those but not the other in a certain situation. That is one of the most often mentioned triggers of math anxiety. So if you just memorize, as you mentioned, you probably won't understand too much of the rationale of these methods, whereas if you rely on examples and actually try to understand the material, you won't have confusion and you won't have that much math anxiety.
Thank you.
Please. Professor Molnár, Gyöngyvér Molnár.
Thank you. I would also have a question to Danish. Looking at math anxiety from assessment perspectives, have you compared a paper and pencil and a computer-based environment, how students behave and how their math anxiety is in paper and pencil testing or computer-based testing? Because based on our research results, students take computer-based tests as games or look at similar like computer games and naturally tests. So can be any differences recognized between paper pencil testing and computer-based testing?
That's a good question. We haven't done anything like this. I would think about time pressure as an anxiety generating factor. For example, if you give a computer test to students where they have to respond one question every 5 seconds, I guess they will be anxious. But, and if you have a paper and pencil test, which you have to solve in 10 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on the number of questions, that can or cannot be anxiety generating. So I think we published a review paper on the importance of time pressure. I can think about time pressure as an important factor. Perhaps you can regulate them better with computerized testing. I'm not sure, but it's a great question. I don't know about related studies.
Thank you.
Professor Lovitz.
This great talk. I would like to mention that from my experience with my children, but also with talking to people who are in this the profession of media education, it is clear to me that children at different ages have different, so certain materials or certain level of cognitive abilities are very closely related to ages. So for example, at a certain age, they would still hate or completely lost when they would have to compute, I don't know, x minus y times x plus y. But maybe a year later, when they compute it, they will be enthusiastic because it's such a nice identity. So now if they are forced to learn something before they are ready to learn this, or maybe past it when it's already boring for them, couldn't this sort of trigger math anxiety? And then you will see this kind of situation that, you know, they don't quite understand this, so they have math anxiety, and then they are sort of running behind themselves, try to catch up, but maybe they will never be able to. Although maybe 2 years later, they would easily understand the material where they lost sort of or were left behind.
Yes, I would agree with this, of course. Like, this is related to the previous confusion issue. If you try to teach something which they don't understand, then they basically experience that they are responding randomly and just have no idea why they have to say A or B. That is fairly anxiety inducing. Basically, it's expecting the unexpected is what's generating anxiety. So that's an important thing to consider. And that's related to another big domain of studies. That's my other area, is actually cognitive foundations of mathematics learning. So we know that there is a developmental pathway of, let's say, working memory, visual memory, verbal memory, which is supporting math learning. And probably these cognitive factors are strongly related to what children can and cannot learn at certain ages. Of course, it's interesting to consider cultural differences. As I mentioned, I still feel that I'm still living from my Hungarian math education, which I got in a small Eastern Hungarian village, which I thought was better education than what I see a lot of times in the UK afterwards. And not only I feel, actually, it may be interesting in this audience that once I was having a discussion with math educators at Durham University, and they were studying the course books, mathematics course books from all over the world. They were trying to identify the best ones. And they thought, when we discussed this with them, that the math course books for primary school from the 80s of Hungary were the best in the world. That's an interesting contributor perhaps to understanding an age-appropriate material. I was quite happy about that, of course.
We went to school too early, unfortunately. Before.
Oh, yeah. Well, I went in the 80s, so I'm happy about that.
Please, Professor Biro.
Thank you very much. You presented a very interesting international survey of math anxiety in different countries. Do you think that there is any correlation between the number of classes per week dedicated to mathematics education in different countries and the level of anxiety on that country?
That's an interesting question, but I don't know the response to this because I haven't seen any actual data about
because
this.
Unfortunately, here in Hungary, we see that the number of classes dedicated to mathematics and the science in general is decreasing from the 80s to nowadays.
Oh.
And
well,
this might be the cause for this math anxiety.
It all may relate to the understanding issue, of course. If you, for example, keep the demands at the same level, but you are delivering less and less education, of course, children will be less and less certain in in the understanding. And understanding is time consuming, of course. You can't just throw tests at children, teach to the test. You have to spend time on that they understand the depth of a problem as well. Oh, everybody, not only the best.
Professor Chapo, please.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Actually, I would have two different kinds of questions. The first issues could be related to more specific theoretical research issues, like what is the specificity of mathematics anxiety? Because you presented that you would have data about general anxiety and test anxiety. And how could be separated actually mathematics anxiety from test anxiety? Because mostly, as you also presented, mathematics anxiety appears in testing situations. So I think that's a very interesting research issue. My other questions would be related to the practice. What are the educational consequences or implications of your research? Namely, how could we make mathematics more enjoyable? Probably there are some teaching methods or approaches to mathematics education that may be less stressful for students, like realistic mathematics education or inquiry-based mathematics education that makes mathematics less abstract and make mathematical phenomena closer to the real world of children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important comments as well. We also have studied the specificity question, which is a very important one. So we published a biggish paper on that from the data from this 1,800 children, where we try to separate general anxiety, test anxiety from math anxiety in primary school and secondary school. Of course, it's a big question. The usual finding is that you find the correlation of quite substantial 0.5, 0.4, 0.5 with general anxiety and math anxiety. It's notable, not huge, but it's a notable correlation. And with test anxiety about a 0.6, 0.7. So that's a very high correlation. And what you can, usually how we approach this problem is that you try to correlate math results with math anxiety scores, test anxiety scores, general anxiety scores, you know, which one is a good predictor. And then you can do, of course, partial correlation, regression analysis. And what we invariably found was that math anxiety always explains some additional variance, quite notable additional variance beyond general anxiety and test anxiety. So of course, these anxiety types are overlapping, but they are not perfectly the same. And what we also found is they have a developmental course. In our UK study, what we found is that in primary school, all three anxiety types were not yet very separated from each other. So you found about the same correlation initially between math outcomes and test anxiety, math anxiety, which we could call academic anxieties and general anxiety. However, by secondary school, they separated from each other. There were some students who showed high general anxiety, but low math and test anxiety. And other students showed very high academic anxieties, especially high math anxiety, and their math scores were the poorest, and they showed relatively low general anxiety. So, and overall, from another study as well, we know that math anxiety seems to increase during schooling, which is an interesting phenomenon. Even in Italy, we found the same. We have done a large Italian study with some collaborators over there. It's also good gelato, so it's great to work there. And so it seems it's increasing during schooling, and math anxiety and academic anxiety in general is getting more separable from general anxiety by secondary school. It's not yet a closed question how they co-develop and how, let's say, test anxiety differs from math anxiety. We have to consider a very large number of interactions. For example, you can imagine that some students may think about math anxiety primarily when you ask them about test anxiety. if they think that math is the most stressful test situation, of course, then when they respond to test anxiety questionnaire, they will think about math. So you will measure a high correlation between the two. We would need to ask them about how anxious they find history or literature. Definitely in my own school experience, I haven't met too many students who are super anxious about literature. I would say the best mathematicians I knew were anxious about their literature work, perhaps, not sure, but that's very anecdotal. And then the other question was, how can we use all this? Intervention is an interesting question. I mentioned some points at the end. You know, I would say that different groups of children need different kinds of intervention method. I think that's already one important point to consider, that let's say if somebody is math anxious, it may or may not make sense just to throw more math at them. Perhaps you need anxiety management more, because primarily, or dealing with time pressure, maybe their issue. I think this individualized approach is one important point here. And I think that one of the most striking findings which we found is that the discrepancy, let's say, in anxiety between genders is already there in early primary school. So is this just a self-report bias, or is it really that the girls are bringing something really negative stereotypes already with them from the family? And we measured this in Italy, we measured this in the UK, in another country as well. Also, we have some unpublished Chinese data which was similar to this. So it's kind of very early, you find this gender discrepancy. That's a big research question. Why exactly, and how can we deal with this? Can you alleviate this with training at all, or we just have to convince the parents that no, math is not a dangerous subject for girls? And yeah, I would say that all these other points I listed in the last slide may be of interest to educators. In this booklet, actually, we also talk more about the teachers, potential issues around teachers and teacher training, which I didn't highlight here. I just very briefly mentioned that it seems like that trainee teachers show high levels of math. So perhaps even we can draw conclusions about increasing the math education levels of primary school trainee teachers. That's mostly US data. I would be interested to see how this is in Hungary, for example, or in other European countries. That would be a very interesting study to do, and how there is some data according to which teachers may transmit their anxiety to their children, to their pupils, and most teachers, of course, are women. There is some data on this, so perhaps it is more likely that they transmit their anxiety to girls. Lots of questions which can be related to practical applications here. I think there are still too many questions, many more questions than responses.
Please,
yes.
Professor Play.
I don't want the sort of abruptly finish the very interesting discussion on mathematics, anxiety, and all the subtleties, but we have to revert to the general discussion too in the timeline. And let me raise two issues that are partly related to the presentation of Zsolt Lovitz, partly to the presentation of Julia Savos, and of course they also relate to the meta-anxiety issue. So the general, because remember, the original reason for calling this session was the impact of the pandemic in science education, in the distance mode, and so on. So my sort of the general question is, what do you think, what will remain in our real interactive world if we return to real person-to-person education and science education in particular? Will there be any tools and experiences we learned in the confinement time transferred to when we sort of are liberated again? And my second issue is specifically targeted to Professor Lovitz. You were presenting extremely interesting uses of technology, not only internet, but you know, computer surfaces and also mobile phones and so on, mainly in teaching science and mathematics. Do you have any efforts to use these electronic devices in teaching life sciences or knowledge about the life in general?
So should I respond first? Okay. So thank you very much. So actually, we had a conference on Wednesday with the International Society for Educational Design, and then this was one of them, the question that what will happen when we go back to kind of normal, and then whether we are learning something from this. And my response was that there is lots of new innovations and then lots of new ways how we are starting to teach mathematics and then STEM and STEAM ideas. And I think if we start to get, so assessment and testing could be very difficult in this period of time. And then I think what would be really good to keep some of this innovation and then also adjust the testing and assessment of these new approaches which is emerging, especially during this period. And then also when we look at that, what the goals of the European Union is to improve the skills of students and concentrate on skills of different students, that how we could adjust our efforts to this direction as well. And your question to the life sciences, yes, we are looking at some biology teaching, but I don't have too much experience with the life sciences work. But I know there are some of them, the students are looking at 3D printing. So, for example, 3D printing working with blind students and teaching them biology through this. And then augmented reality is also used a lot in different fields of life sciences. So I think then there will be lots of new innovations in which we could cover in this direction too.
And Julia, do you think you would continue to use distance methods even when contact methods are available?
Yeah, this would be our goal, because it's quite efficient to run online studies. But of course, there are a few studies which cannot be run in
I know that.
So, like EEG studies or some subgroup of behavioral studies where the kids, so they have to manipulate different objects. Yeah.
While you are thinking about other questions, let me reply to the one comment or question which we have on the chat. Someone asked whether watching videos and PC in general is bad for your eyesight. It's an extremely tricky question, which would be hard to reply shortly, but there are many studies in general, not just in the confinement, many studies showing that the most important issue is that you have actually very narrow angles when you are watching the screens, and that really tires the eye muscles and so on. Some people claim, you know, there are even practical advices that to stop the screen and look at more distant objects for 20 minutes after 2 hours and so on. So it's a very intricate issue. Intricate also because on the long run, many studies have also raised the issue whether too much reading on the paper, again, because of the specific angles, is or might be one factor in the increase of myopia, short-sightedness. I mean, we don't want to answer this. That's a hot issue in general ophthalmology and also in psychology, whether there is any causal link. So it's not only the watching on the screens, it's not the screen specifically, but the whole issue of looking at objects from very short distances under very narrow angles. That's the real issue. So anyway, I just wanted to reply that we read your question, Maya Machavidiani. It's a much debated empirical issue.
Yeah, and at the same time, we have to emphasize that these studies are really short, so it takes less than 5 minutes to participate in a study. And these kids, they already have some kind of digital experience because they video chat with their grandparents or with their relatives.
Yeah, but I think our colleague's question was not about these experimental studies, but about the fact that in the situation of the lockdown, we on the average in our professions are facing the screen on the average 7 to 8 hours every day. So that's the issue, not the issue that a child is exposed to for 5 minutes to a video. So it's the sort of very long exposure. So please, questions and comments.
I have one.
Sure, go ahead, Professor Hunyadi.
So thank you very much. So I just want to reflect to your question. What I usually say when this idea comes up about this online training methods, I usually say that teaching online is difficult, examining students online is impossible. And my opinion is that there are useful methods, additional methods, but in my opinion, online methods, but in my opinion, the person-based teaching is extremely important. And it's also important to make the kids and the young people to work in groups, because this is something really important for life on the long run, to learn them how to work in small communities. And if they are just sitting in front of a monitor, that will be a very bad in terms of alienation of the kids. So in my opinion, the way is really contact teaching, and online teaching is just supplementary and can help. But I don't think it's right if it substitutes completely the person-to-person teaching. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This almost sounds as a concluding remark. Let me add to this that I think it's an extremely interesting part of the issue of online teaching, how to introduce group work in the context of online teaching and so on. The group of Professor Lovitz is already doing work along these lines. So it's actually online and distance methods don't exclude group solution and formation of groups. And that's, I think, one very promising aspect of towards the future. I think that our announced time is approaching to close. In my experience is that the three presentations and your presence here sort of gave all of us many new ideas and many aspects of reconsidering of what we learn in the situation of confinement about human nature and human learning and human problem solutions. The reason I was emphasizing these aspects, which the presenters highlighted, was that I didn't want, or we didn't want in our chapter of the Budapest Hub of Academia Europaea to start with a small meeting emphasizing all the negative aspects of confinement and feeling very sorry about the impact of technology and so on. So I think it was a very fruitful meeting, and I give the floor for our chair, Professor Lovitz, to sort of officially end the session.
Thank you very much. I share your comment, your feeling. This was a very interesting sequence of talks, which gave very different aspects, but of very important issues. Let's hope that we can go on, and I think I agree with Professor Hunyadi that the internet does not replace personal contact, personal exchange, neither in teaching nor in scientific information exchange. But at this time, that was the best we could do. Thank you very much to all of you for participating. And so let's close this meeting. See you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.